When you think about a country's geography, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Maybe it's the big stuff, right? Like towering mountains or long, sandy coastlines. But really, that's just the skeleton. The real lifeblood, the circulatory system that brings a nation to life, that's its rivers. And in a place like India, the rivers are so much more than just water. They're these ancient, almost sacred lifelines that have literally carved the landscape, shaped thousands of years of history, and, they still sustain over 1 billion people today.
All right, so how are we going to tackle this huge topic? Well, here's the plan. First, we're going to get the basics down, like what even is a drainage system? Then we'll take a trip to meet the two major groups of Indian rivers. We've got the huge snow-fed giants that come roaring out of the Himalayas, and then we've got the older rain-fed rivers of the peninsula. And to wrap it all up, we'll bring it right back to today and look at why these rivers are so important for modern India and, well, the massive problems they're up against.
Okay, first things first. Before we can really get into the story of these amazing rivers, we need to learn a little bit of the lingo. How geographers actually talk about this stuff.
So let's break this down. The term drainage, that's pretty simple. It just refers to the whole river system in a particular area. But the term you really want to remember is drainage basin. A drainage basin is the entire area of land that's drained by one single river system. The best way to picture it? Think of a giant funnel. Seriously, any rain that falls anywhere inside that funnel, it's all eventually going to end up in that one main river.
And that brings us to this really cool idea called a water divide. Now, this could be a huge mountain range, or it could be just a little bit of high ground, but its job is massive. Just picture it. You're standing on top of this divide. A raindrop falls on your left. It's going to start a journey to one river system. But a raindrop that falls just inches away on your right, it's headed to a completely different river, maybe even a different ocean. It's such a simple idea, but it has these huge consequences for the entire landscape.
All right, now in India, the rivers are basically split into two big groups, two distinct families. And each one has its own personality, its own story, its own rhythm, and it all comes down to where they're born.
And this really lays out the difference perfectly. On one hand, you've got the Himalayan rivers. These guys are perennial. That's a key word. It means they flow all year round because they're fed by a double whammy, melting snow from the glaciers and monsoon rains. They travel a long way and carve these super deep gorges. Then on the other hand, you have the peninsula rivers. They're mostly seasonal. Their flow depends entirely on the monsoon. So, they're raging rivers during the rainy season, but they can shrink down to almost nothing in the dry months. Their courses are shorter and a lot shallower.
Okay, let's dive into that first group and meet the three giants of the north. We're talking about river systems so huge, they drain a massive chunk of the entire continent. First up is the incredible Indus River. Its journey starts way up in Tibet, near the famous Lake Mansarovar. From there, it flows west, and when it enters India in Ladakh, wow, it cuts this absolutely stunning, picturesque gorge right through the mountains. And this river is an absolute giant, stretching for about 2,900 kilometers. That's one of the longest in the world. Now, a lot of its key tributaries, you've probably heard of them, like the Zanskar, the Sutlej, the Chenab. They flow through India, but the river itself is a shared resource. And this is super important. Back in 1960, the Indus Water Treaty was signed. It's this major agreement that dictates how India and Pakistan share the water, with India getting to use about 20% of the total. That treaty is still a huge deal in the region's politics today.
All right, next up, the Ganga, probably the most sacred river of them all. And what's fascinating is that it doesn't just start as one little stream. It's actually born right here, at a place called Devaprayag. This is where its two main headwaters, the Bhagirathi and the Alaknanda, come together in this absolutely spectacular meeting of waters.
So after its birth, the Ganga travels over 2,500 kilometers across the northern plains, gathering water from tons of other rivers. Then it meets up with another giant, the Brahmaputra, and together they create the Sundarban Delta. I mean, this place is just unbelievable. It's this huge, constantly shifting maze of rivers and mangrove forests. In fact, it's the largest and fastest-growing delta on the entire planet, and it's famous for being home to the Royal Bengal tiger.
And that brings us to our third Himalayan giant, the Brahmaputra. Now, this river has a few different names. In Tibet, they call it the Sangpo. It flows eastward for a really long way, almost parallel to the Himalayas. Then it does something crazy. It takes this dramatic hairpin U-turn and slams into India in Arunachal Pradesh. Once it's in India, it gets hit with massive amounts of rain and becomes this huge, powerful river. It carries so much silt that it constantly shifts its channel, which is why it's known for causing these terrible, destructive floods in Assam year after year.
Okay, so let's shift gears. We're leaving the young, jagged Himalayas behind, and we're heading south to the much older, more weathered plateau of peninsular India. And the rivers here? They tell a completely different story. They flow to a much older, calmer beat.
And the main director of the show down here is this mountain range called the Western Ghats. It's basically a long wall of mountains running down the west coast. And because it's the main water divide, it forces most of the big rivers to flow east, all the way across the plateau, before they finally empty out into the Bay of Bengal.
So here are the big names of the peninsular network. You've got the Godavari, which is the largest one. They even call it the Dakshin Ganga, or the Ganga of the South. But check this out. There are two rebels in the group, the Narmada and the Tapi. See, while almost every other major river flows east, these two break the rules. They flow west through these deep cracks in the land called rift valleys, and they end up in the Arabian Sea. Totally different from the others.
So, okay, we've met all these vast river systems. But the big question is, so what? Why do they matter so much? What really makes them the lifelines of the entire subcontinent?
Well, you really can't overstate how important they are. I mean, for thousands of years, people have built their lives in cities along these rivers. They're absolutely fundamental to the economy. Think about it. They provide water for agriculture and irrigation, they're used for navigation, and they generate hydropower. And it's not just the rivers. Lakes like Wular Lake, India's largest freshwater lake, are also key. They're not just for tourism. They play this vital role in regulating river flow and stopping floods.
But there's a dark side to all this. This total dependence on the rivers comes at a huge price. The demand for water from growing cities, from industry, from agriculture, it's just skyrocketing. We're pulling more and more water out. And at the same time, a massive amount of pollution. We're talking untreated sewage, industrial waste, is just being dumped right back in. It's destroying the water quality and crippling the river's own ability to heal themselves.
Now, this isn't a new problem, and people have been trying to fix it for a while. It really started back in 1985 with the Ganga Action Plan. A decade later, in 1995, that plan was expanded to include other rivers under the National River Conservation Plan. And the latest big push started in 2014 with something called the Namami Gange program, which is a massive flagship mission to try and bring the Ganga back to life.
And so all of this leads us to one final, really critical question. India's rivers are this incredible, timeless gift, but right now they're under more pressure than ever before. As the demand for water just keeps on climbing, you have to wonder, can these ancient, sacred lifelines be saved for future generations? That's the challenge.